Well, Jacoby Walter was the star on Tuesday for the Baylor Bears, but it was fellow freshman Yves Missi who brought home a win for Scott Drew over the Auburn Tigers, who might be a little bit underrated. Let's discuss.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Wednesday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more right now. New customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Folks, joined today by Leaf to Lean, as we do every week here on the Locked On College Basketball. But this time, Leaf and I got real college basketball games to discuss. The season is officially back. No longer are we doing drafts and making previews and predictions for the season, although that was a lot of fun. Now we get to do some actual analysis. We got a bunch of games to talk about today. We're talking about a very nice win for Creighton. We're talking about our first look at Rick Pitino's new squad at St. John's, a big win for Michigan. Less impressive wins for a couple other Big Ten teams, as well as a loss for a Big East team in DePaul and an SEC team in Vanderbilt. All of that we're going to get to, but of course, we have to start today's show with what was very clearly the biggest game on Tuesday, and a game that very much lived up to the expectations between Scott Drew and the Baylor Bears and Bruce Pearl and the Auburn Tigers. Baylor ends up winning 88-82 in an outstanding back and forth contest, a really nice comeback from Scott Drew's Bears, led by star freshman Jacoby Walter. And Leaf, we knew that this kid was good. Isaac said recently that he thought it was a bold prediction to predict that Walter might be better than Keontae George was for Baylor last year. But I'm not sure that looks that bold anymore, because Walter came out 28 points on a fantastic 7 of 13 shooting, knocked down all of his free throws. I mean, this was an absolute powerhouse performance from one of the best guards in the country. I know, Leaf, as somebody who obviously does a lot of work with the NBA draft, this had to be a really inspiring performance to see from Jacoby in this one.
Absolutely. I hadn't seen much of him. I'd actually heard from a guy who's a regular listening to Locked On NBA Big Board. He's like, you got to watch Jacoby Walter. You got to watch Jacoby Walter. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to make sure to watch the Baylor games. Like, I don't tend to watch too much high school. Last year, I watched just a little bit, saw Brandon Miller, and I was like, that's the guy. That's the college player. That's the guy. I'm not saying yet that Jacoby Walters, this year's version of Brandon Miller, that's clearly the best college basketball player, but he solidified himself as one of the top three. Like, I think it's Collier showed like, hey, he's that guy, and Jacoby Walter did that as well. I think he is a little bit right-hand dominant, but he is a sweet shooting two guard that was not fazed at all by an aggressive, speedy Auburn team that played multiple bodies on him. That wasn't a team that was like mid-major and, they don't have any guys to guard him. Auburn was winning for most of that game, and they looked to be the better team for the majority of it, well coached by Bruce Pearl, forcing turnovers. And then Baylor won the opening, as Fran Fraschilla said like 60 times. They won the opening 4 minutes and got themselves back in the game. And I'm really excited to see what this Baylor team turns into in the Big 12, because not typically, like, when you have a chance to win that type of conference, and obviously it runs through Lawrence, Kansas. Sure. You have two guys that are, if they hit their ceilings, you should grow as a team. That's Yves Missi as well as Jacoby Walter. And obviously both were huge in that win. And it was a really good game at a showcase time. Like, sometimes they aren't, and it was well played, a little sloppy at times, but 88-82 is not really a typical college score either. So that was really, really exciting for both teams.
Yeah, I think that the proof that these two teams are some of the most well-coached teams in college basketball was evident there. Yeah, there was some sloppiness, but it's the first game of the year. You kind of expect that. But it kind of felt like a chess match between these two teams and these two programs. And I'm really glad you brought up Yves Missi, because certainly all of the attention will go on Walter for this performance, and it should. He was absolutely fantastic. But Missi, you could argue, won him this game. And we have a source within the Baylor program that we spoke to prior to the show who had a couple of really nice things to say about Missi, effectively saying, we think he's an NBA player. Like the direct quote is, Yves is a pro. He's an NBA pro, and he's better than the team expected. And I thought he looked phenomenal in this game, and one of the big concerns about Baylor coming into the season, like we expected the guard play to be good. And Ray J. Dennis had a lot of turnovers in this game, but I think kind of started to play a little better towards the end. I think he's going to be fine. Walter's obviously fantastic, but it was the front court where there was some concern. And Missi looking the way he did, he had that big steal that led to the dunk. He had the block shot on the next possession. Like, he looked like a game-changing player. And again, knowing from not just from an NBA draft perspective, but from a Baylor perspective and a Big 12 perspective, it feels like Missi is a really critical piece for this team to potentially reach that threshold as the top team in the Big 12, or at least a top 3 seeded team in March.
Yeah, I think he really ramps up their ceiling. I think their floor was decently high just because they have veterans in the backcourt, and they're going to be better defensively than they were last year. And that if you have that much scoring in Jacoby Walter and you have Ray J. Dennis, who's a 19-a-game scorer the previous season, that leaves you as a top 6 team in March, like realistically. Right. So now their ceiling's way higher. And just a funny anecdote, I was watching the game with my dad, and I watched Yves Missi shoot free throws a couple minutes before his big little breakout. And I was like, those are some good, like he missed one of them, made the second. I was like, that's some good form. And I saw him get a block earlier in the game. I told my dad, I was like, I bet this guy plays in the NBA. Probably not yet, but I like him. Like 5 minutes pass and he goes the and one dunk, a free throw, and then like a tip like rebound, keeps the play alive, and they score. And then everyone's tweeting about it. And I was like, well, that was timed perfectly. I wish I'd tweeted that. But the one thing that I will say about Baylor, back to college basketball, even though the draft side of me got excited watching this game, was I will say I didn't like the way that Nunn and Dennis brought the ball up. They were a little too selfish for my liking. And I have some questions about, can this freshman be their alpha? Because he only shot 13 shots to score 28 points.
Right.
Like that's hard to – that's not a steady enough diet for someone as talented as he is.
Yeah.
And I felt like Dennis and Nunn were slow ball movers at best.
Want to switch to Auburn real quick before we move on to our next game here. Aden Holloway looked fantastic. We're talking about the fact that he's the third mentioned freshman in this game is kind of wild. He's a 5-star guy, number 16 ranked prospect in that class at 24/7 Sports, had 19 points, 6 assists, 4 of 8 from deep. I mean, a really incredible performance for him, for a team that has had some inconsistency in the guard room for the last couple of years under Bruce Pearl. And, Janai Broom looks solid as well. Didn't shoot particularly efficiently, but had 16 and 11. And I guess my overall question is, this game said a lot about Baylor. I think in a significant way, you said it raised their ceiling, but I think it said a lot of positive things about Auburn as well, a team that some are projecting to be 6th or 7th in the SEC. And the SEC is certainly stacked, but man, if this is the 6th best team in the SEC, either the SEC is absolutely loaded or Auburn's a little better than we think. Is that kind of where you're at with them right now?
I actually wasn't terribly shocked by Auburn today. I think I was higher on them than many.
Yeah.
I will say that Holloway raises their ceiling if he's able to score as much. I thought he'd be able to distribute and help them. That said, I was so low on their guards in previous years that I assumed that there would be progression to the mean. And so I guess it didn't shock me. I think Florida, Ole Miss, Auburn, Mississippi State, 3 of those 4 probably make the tournament, and those are probably considered 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm in the same boat. I just don't think I was as shocked as many were by them being in this game with Baylor, who's considered a top 25 team.
Yeah.
And that said, I don't think Baylor's that great yet, but now they have a big ceiling. I think if Holloway can play pick and roll with Broom and they get someone else to supplement the 3-point shooting other than Holloway, Auburn's got a chance to crack the top 5 of the SEC, but I'm worried about their shooting. Yeah.
Well, I want to move on to talk about Creighton against Florida A&M. Obviously not a high caliber opponent, not as exciting of a game, and Creighton absolutely blew the doors off of A&M here, as we kind of expected they would. But in particular, I want to talk about Trey Alexander, because Stephen Ashworth looked great. Ryan Kalkbrenner was efficient, although he only scored 9 points. Baylor Shireman had 15, kind of all what you would expect. But Trey Alexander, 20 points on 7 of 8 shooting. He had 5 assists. He had 4 rebounds. Leaf, I know you've been high on Trey Alexander, and we've kind of talked about him really kind of even having another breakout season almost for the Blue Jays. And my goodness, he looked absolutely incredible. He looked like an All-American in this game, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we did our All-American draft, he was definitely on both of our lists.
Yep.
And I told you, and I can't remember if it was on air or off, but it's the same idea, is I think at the end of the games, when it matters for Creighton, Trey Alexander's the guy.
Yeah.
And I know they're going to get a lot of points from Stephen Ashworth. He may play the point guard as in the role of bringing the ball up, but their best creator is the man right there, Trey Alexander. So if he can score efficiently and pass to these guys who are dead-eye shooters, that opens up the lanes. His mid-range game's really good. And then, of course, pick and roll with Kalkbrenner should open up more for shooting. And that said, no one's going to shoot as well as they did. They set a franchise record or at least tied one in threes made. And they're playing a poor opponent. But I think it really bodes well and inspires confidence that a lot of their players got in on the action from the three, not just Ashworth and not just Shireman. You saw Isaac Trout. You saw Mason Miller step back and shoot it. So now it's really who can defend on the perimeter to complement what Kalkbrenner is going to do as an anchor. And I think that's a Final Four caliber ceiling for sure.
Well, Creighton was not the only Big East team to play. We saw Rick Pitino era begin at St. John's with a big bang. We're going to discuss that as well as Michigan's big win. But first, today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Prize Picks. Folks, Prize Picks offers weekly promotions that can lead you to big payouts, like their Taco Tuesday deals. Every Tuesday, Prize Picks will discount select player projections up to 25% to provide you with even more value. Plus, with the Prize Picks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for NFL or college football top 25 matchups, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and they do not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. This is unprecedented in the daily fantasy sports space. PrizePicks is the only platform with injury insurance. Beyond that, this app is just really easy for folks to use. All you have to do is pick two or more players and choose more or less with their given stats. So for Wednesday's games, you can pick Syracuse guard Judah Mintz, 18.5 points. JJ Starling is at 15.5 points. If you think both those guys are going to blow past those numbers against Canisius, you hit over. They both do so. You get paid. It is that simple. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use that promo code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use that promo code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, Leaf, we're going to stick in the Big East here after talking about Creighton's big win. We're going to talk St. John's and Rick Pitino, because I think one of the most exciting teams to watch for the first time this year was St. John's, because obviously new coach, entirely new roster, basically outside of Joel Soriano. And I was really curious to see what is that rotation going to look like, who's going to play, what the situation is going to be. And Pitino didn't want to play his hand too much, and I respect that. 11 players played 7 or more minutes. All of them got in the game in the first 12 minutes. I think at the under 8 timeout, he'd already played 10 or 11 guys. He was trying things, experimenting, getting new lineups in there. And why wouldn't you when you have so many new players? Let's figure out what's going to work the best. There were some obvious standout performances. Soriano, one of the few non-newcomers to the roster, 22 points, 11 rebounds, 3 blocks. He also hit 2 threes, the first 2 3-pointers of his career. If that is becoming an element of Soriano's game, my goodness, the Big East is going to be put well on notice for that. Dennis Jenkins, transfer coming in, 17 points, 8 assists, 7 boards, kind of a Tristan Newton type vibe of being able to kind of threaten for a triple-double every night. Jenkins was more efficient as a scorer than Newton typically is. And Chris Ledlam had a really solid game as well, the Harvard transfer who spent some time this offseason at Tennessee before ultimately ending up in St. John's. 16 points, 14 rebounds, 9 offensive rebounds, was really crashing the offensive glass. He also had 4 points and 2 steals. Again, this was against Stony Brook. It was only a 16-point victory. It's somewhat easy to look at that and think, well, maybe not be as rosy about the performance as I feel right now, but we saw some really solid performances. St. John's pushed the pace. It felt more like a Pitino team. And as somebody who's excited to see Pitino back in the Big East, I thought this was an exciting start for St. John's. I'm curious what you thought about this game and the lineups that St. John's ran out there.
Yeah, I think the Big East has a claim to be the best conference in basketball. I think the Big 12 probably has it. Maybe the SEC's got depth, but the top 5 of the Big East, or the top 4 at least, and then you could argue with the 5th, the excitement generated by Pitino is higher than any of the other programs, 3 of which are ranked within the top 10. And that speaks to the legendary accolades that he's accomplished over the years, and he's looking to add more. And I think he had a standalone Big East slot. Like there was Big East tip off. All these other teams played the other day, and they gave him the next day. I was like, okay, we got to honor Pitino.
Yeah.
And he's just generating this buzz. And it's great to feel that buzz. It's palpable, even where I am. And I'm listening to podcasts, and everyone's like, oh, I can't wait to see St. John's. Who said that in the last 20 years? No one. No one. And so the fact that they win is not the story here. Like they beat a Stony Brook team that they had no business winning that game. Soriano was good. Ledlam was good. Now it's just like a jigsaw puzzle. Who can fit with what Pitino wants to do? And is it just going to be maybe not quite platooning, but you're going to get quick rotations in and out? And so I'm curious to see who establishes themselves as like a lead guard on this team, because it feels like their front court's pretty set. But is it Jenkins? Is Dingle someone who scored 23 a game last year? Is he Big East caliber, or is that just inflated? And how do they handle that playmaking duty? Because despite Soriano hitting 2 threes, I don't think they're very good at shooting. And Ledlam proves where he belongs. He's on the interior. He got 14 rebounds. Yeah. And so I'm very curious to see the spacing of this team, but I feel like they're going to be a good defensive team. That's just like that's a given with Pitino. They're going to try hard. They're going to have depth enough to like push players and go fast, which is a staple of Pitino. And I think they're a top 6 team in the Big East. I'm not quite really ready to put them in the top 5. I think Providence probably is better, but I think they easily could be top 5 in the Big East, and this is a conference that probably gets 5 or 6 teams into the tournament.
Yeah. The guard rotation is going to be interesting to me. Jenkins was the one who stood out in this game. Dingle, the guy who I expected to start and did not start in this game. He still played 20 minutes. He still had 13 points. He looked okay, but I think there is a question about how that translates entirely. And then it's like some of the wing guard rotation, like where does Naheem Aline fit in? Where does Glenn Taylor fit in? Where does Sean Conway fit in? Where does Simeon Wilcher fit in? Like all those guys played. There's so much talent and so much newness to this roster. It's going to be really interesting to see, like, not only these players all adjusting to being in the Big East, but adjusting to playing for Pitino. Like it's a really fascinating story. And I'm really excited to see how this team shakes out in the Big East.
Yeah, here's the question for you. In the Big East, are you going to trust Pitino and a little bit of more of like an amalgamation of a roster? Are you going to take a team like Providence and Kim English's first year that's probably got more on paper talent?
Yeah, I know that's what's tough because I mean, this is we're operating under the assumption that those two teams are fighting for 5th with Villanova in 4th, I presume, and I agree. I think Villanova is 4th. I think both these teams can potentially challenge up there, but I think I'd probably lean St. John's just because of the coaching advantage with Pitino, and that's not a knock on Kim English at all. He is a talented coach, a successful coach, but I think that St. John's has is starting maybe at a little bit lower spot, but I think they have more room to grow. So I would probably pick them, but I'm also not going to be shocked if Providence finishes 5th at all. I think that's a talented roster as well.
Absolutely.
Leaf, I want to move over to the Big Ten, talk about Michigan, the Wolverines. We didn't fully put them on upset watch over UNC-Asheville. I think we kind of touched on, hey, that's maybe a game to keep an eye on because Michigan is a bit unsettled. We're not exactly sure what this roster is going to look like. Asheville has Drew Pember coming back, one of the best players in that conference. And Michigan not only beat UNC-Asheville, they didn't make it particularly close. It was a 25-point victory for them. They dropped 99 points. Again, Asheville's a good mid-major team. It's not exactly the same as beating a team like Florida A&M for Creighton, for example. And Michigan did it on the back of Olivier Nkamhoua, transfer from Tennessee, who we knew was fantastic. He was great for them last year, and he looked amazing in this game. 25 points, 7 boards, 3 assists, 11 of 16 from the field. And when we talk about transfer additions, I mean, even when we talk about transfer additions in the Big Ten, like Nkamhoua is not one of the top names that comes up necessarily, but man, he looked like the real deal for Juwan Howard's team in this game.
Yeah, I actually felt pretty good about Michigan in this game, and I think they've been underrated throughout much of the offseason. Like, I think they were picked 9th or 10th in the Big Ten, and I thought that was crazy. I think you and I discussed that once, where if you were to look at the resumes of Michigan, yes, they don't have their Franz Wagner, they don't have a Hunter Dickinson, but this team plays more the style to the rest of the team. Last year was built around Hunter Dickinson, but the rest of their team was catered to go quickly. Like Doug McDaniel is fast as can be. Terrence Williams is their 4, and he's kind of undersized and likes to spread the floor and cut and shoot threes. Kam was a very good athlete. I think this team's going to play fast, And in their scrimmages, they scored 115 against Marquette. And I don't know what to make about that, but like that's a lot of points.
Yeah.
And then they scored a lot of points again in another scrimmage. So when I saw it was a 10.5-point line, I bet on Michigan pretty quickly yesterday and felt very good about it.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Terrence Williams only scored 15. I made a prop bet if he scored 18 and then Michigan won, I'd be handsomely rewarded. But
pretty.
they pulled him out a little early, so I was a
Yeah.
little disappointed. But I really do think Michigan is a team in the Big Ten that's going to be in the top 6 as opposed to 9th and 10th, which is where everyone seemed to put them. I think they're going to be better than Indiana, and I think they're better than Ohio State, which both teams were picked higher than them.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Indiana because they had a win, not a great win, similar to Maryland, a win, but not a great win on Tuesday. Also want to talk about DePaul and Vanderbilt, who did not have wins, 2 Power 5 programs or Power 6 programs that were not able to win on Tuesday. We're going to talk about all 4 of those games coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, score early and often this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 in your pocket if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, now is the best time to get in on the action. The app is super, super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options. You can bet on spreads, on player props, on over-unders, and more. And right now, you can start making your final 4 bets already. Duke is at plus 330, Kansas at plus 330 as well, Purdue's at plus 430. And if you loved what you saw from John Calipari and the Wildcats in that win over New Mexico State, they're at plus 500. You can toss some money down there as well. So folks, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the college basketball season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, Leaf, let's stick with the Big Ten here to close out the show. We got 4 more games I want to talk about, a little bit more rapid fire as we get into these contests. Indiana escapes with a win over Florida Gulf Coast University. Not a super pretty game, 69-63 was the final score there. Kalel Ware, transfer from Oregon, had 13 and 12, was really productive from the free throw line, also added a trio of blocks. Malik Reneau had 15 points. This team didn't rebound particularly well, didn't pass the ball particularly well, only shot 31% from deep. I know you just mentioned you have Michigan a little higher than Indiana. Between the struggles in this game, Mackenzie Mbaka was extremely quiet. He had just 4 points in 18 minutes. It's just one game. Obviously, that's the caveat with any teams that we're talking about right now, but didn't feel like Indiana was incredibly inspiring in this one.
Yeah, I think that the balance is nice, and they showed good resolve to win this game, even though it was looking tenuous at times. I don't think it's necessarily a good recipe to have Trey Galloway be your lead scorer with 16. I think Malik Reneau's probably going to be the lead scorer for Indiana. But with that said, Malik Reneau leading the score, it's going to be on the interior. So that means Galloway, Ware, and Xavier Johnson are really going to have to shoot the ball well. And that's where my concerns lie with Indiana. I think in this one game sample size, there's not much you can read. But if you just to look at their personnel, they don't have much absolute shooting. And so I think they're going to play congested style of basketball. And they're accustomed to it. Race Thompson and Trace Jackson Davis played together for years and years. I have a few concerns about Indiana, but I think it is a good win to come from behind and show the resolve to get it done. Yeah.
Maryland let Mount St. Mary's really hang around. I think they jumped out to a decent double-digit lead, and then were basically tied throughout the entire second half, or at least trading basket to basket. Still ended up getting the victory, but hard to be super inspired by Maryland after this game. 3 of 16 from deep, just under 19%. Julian Reese was amazing, 18 and 8. Nobody else really looked all that good for Maryland. Any cause for concern here? Or you feel like just some early season jitters for them?
I'm not concerned. I don't think that this team's going to really blow the doors off teams because they play at a kind of steady pace. I think they're going to rebound well. Obviously, Julian Reese being the focal point of that. I think they've got a freshman that can elevate their ceiling, but it's hard to put it all on his shoulders. And then Jameer Young has to be a dude. And I think that's the question. I think Maryland's probably the 5th best team in the Big Ten, but it will threaten for 3rd. I think Wisconsin and Illinois are slightly better than Maryland, but nothing to be concerned about in my opinion.
Gotcha. Let's talk about the 2 losses. Because we talk about the SEC and the Big East being potentially the 2 best teams, probably outside of the Big 12. Those are the 3 best conferences, I should say, in all of college basketball. But any conference has their teams towards the bottom. And while Vanderbilt is not projected to be last in the SEC. DePaul is certainly projected to be last in the Big East, and both these teams didn't do themselves any favors. We'll start with Vanderbilt. They lose to Presbyterian. Yes, they were missing Tyron Lawrence, who's their best player. Yes, they were missing Lee Dort. But they lost to Presbyterian. I mean, you can't do this. This is a team that had some at-large aspirations coming into the season. Could they sneak a bid out of the, get an automatic bid or not an automatic bid, get a bid into the tournament, be one of the SEC teams to make the big dance. And again, even without your best players, this really, really hurts. And I think Jerry Stackhouse's tournament chances, I don't think any team's tournament chances are done after the first game of the season, but man, this does not look good for them.
Yeah, Presbyterian has not won a game or had not won a game in the year of 2023. So they won 5 games. Year. Yeah, so they'd won 5 games last season, but since the calendar flipped, they had not won. So then they win the opener against an SEC opponent on the road. So that's college basketball for you. But yes, Jerry Stackhouse's team, I wouldn't say high aspirations. Like I mentioned, I think there's 8 teams that have a chance to make it, and they were not in my 8. I have them as a team that can win a game in the SEC on a given night, though, with their talent level. And I think it's not terribly devoid of talent, but now they really are facing an uphill climb.
Yeah. Well, let's close out the show with DePaul, a team, Leaf, that I don't think we're going to give a whole lot of airtime to this year. With all due respect to any DePaul fans that are out there, this team just doesn't look. I mean, they don't look Big East caliber. They don't look Power 5 caliber. They had 22 turnovers in a loss to Purdue for Fort Wayne. A Horizon League team turned DePaul over 22 times. They shot under 50% from the field. They shot about 35% from 3, which isn't terrible. They shot about 70% from the free throw line. They really only played 7 players. 8 guys total. 1 guy only played 3 minutes. So we're talking a 7-man rotation, 22 turnovers. This team is in trouble, Leaf. It doesn't look like there's the light at the end of the tunnel for DePaul is a long ways away.
Yeah, I think DePaul has been grasping at straws for a little bit. They've had a few upsets that have given them life, but it's just been their fans are insatiable, but there's not much to support here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that this team, and quite frankly, Purdue Fort Wayne, if you were to look at their records last few years, hasn't been good in the Horizon League. They've not been a good team, and DePaul wasn't in this game. I didn't watch this game, but I was looking at the box score, and throughout the game they were losing. At every stage, it was not they blew it type of game, and you'd almost prefer it to be that as opposed to losing throughout.
Yeah, agreed. Well, Leaf, we got some good games on Wednesday as well. As folks out there are listening to this, we got FAU versus Loyola Chicago. That's the only ranked team that is playing on Wednesday. But we also got a Syracuse game against Canisius. We got Texas Tech planned. So there's a lot of fun basketball to be played here on Wednesday. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners who checked us out throughout the entire offseason here on Locked On College Basketball. Now we're back. We're talking real games all week long. My guy, Isaac Shade, will be back with you on Thursday, and then I'll close out the week on Friday. We got, of course, some fantastic games coming later this week and this weekend. St. Mary's, New Mexico on Thursday is going to be incredible. Arizona, Duke on Friday. Absolutely fantastic stuff coming your way. Leaf, thanks again for coming on the show. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. And until next time, peace.